Thank you very much, Rod. Appreciate that very much. And ladies and gentlemen, we're extremely honored here today and for the entire weekend to have the two very distinguished guests on stage that we do have here. To my left, a lady is very well known around the world. In fact, just recently back from Germany where she did the Berlin Marathon, but it was also partly because she was releasing her book there as well, published in German. And an inductee recently, and I want to talk about this a little more, rather than bringing you all the stats on these two wonderful human beings that we have here today, both from the US, by the way, so we're delighted they've come across safely across the border. That there is so much that could be said about them. I don't want to just bring it out as formally the introduction, because I want to get into some of the stuff they've done so that you can really get to enjoy and embrace the stories of both these people. But Kathrine Switzer, 1967, probably the turning point in your athletic life and career, which diverted your career in so many different ways. Did the Boston Marathon wearing, I think it was race number 261, and signed a check saying K. Switzer instead of Kathrine, which would have been a bit of a giveaway because women weren't allowed to do the race at that time. And as many of you know, there was a race director called Jock Semple who, when he realized Kathrine was out there, literally tried to barge her off the course. Fortunately, there was someone she knew very well alongside her who did the reverse and barged him off, so she was able to complete the course in just around 4 hours, 20 minutes. And that was at 20 years of age. I know you were born in Germany in 1947, which really fascinated me as well, because Frank Shorter was also born in Germany in 1947, so there's a lot of links. And both of these people have had some hurdles to conquer. The hurdle I would see for Kathrine has been about getting women's racing to the level it is today. And if you hadn't heard the stats earlier, 61% of the field tomorrow are in the female gender. So that is what has happened. Bart Yasso, known as the Chief Running Officer for Runners World, has written hundreds of great stories. He's also written a book, My Life on the Run, and fascinating stuff, because when we look at what he's achieved, he's gone from frostbite to heat stroke almost, given the 7 continents and the races that he has challenged himself to. But he's also had some hurdles, and I wouldn't mind talking about some of those. And one of them was a comeback from Lyme disease, which I know has caused a lot of grief for a lot of people. So the fact that you're out there and the fact that you're even able to do a run today to the Terry Fox statue at mile 0 here, I think is just wonderful. So let's get to it. We're going to pose them some questions at the end of this, because we are very fortunate that we have been given an hour. We will open it up to questions and answers. So please be appreciative of the fact that you're amongst the lucky people here to listen to them. And if you want to come back later, they'll get more in depth, of course, with their stuff, because they're both going to be speaking later throughout the day, and they'll be out there tomorrow as part of the event. So if I may start with you, Bart, please, I would like to, you said yesterday, because we talked about an induction, both these people recently got inducted into Halls of Fame. Bart joins the illustrious group, and his name, I'm glad to say, was right beside mine, because the guys from Front Runners do a wonderful job. As you know, Rob Reed and his team host the event and host a lot of stuff there, including a press conference. That press conference happened yesterday, and they have a walk of fame. Really, as Rob said, it should be a run of fame, because it's all about runners. And Bart Yasso now has one of those great plaques that is there on the ground outside the store. So the most recent inductee into the Walk of Fame here in Victoria.
Yeah, with an illustrious group, and Steve being one of those people.
So can you tell us, Rob was able to tell us about why the induction happened, but you mentioned something about, look where I came from, who would have ever believed that this would happen?
Yeah, my tagline in running has always been never limit where running can take you, and it literally has taken me from a very small industrial town in Pennsylvania to the sidewalk in Victoria, BC, and you can't imagine that that could be possible. But thank God that 34 years ago, when I went out to run 1 mile just to get in shape to play another sport, never thought I would be a runner. Thank God I did that one run 34 years ago, because it changed my life in so many ways. That, you know, running is not about putting one foot in front of the other. It is about conquering barriers and changing people's lives and having people's dreams come true. And Steve gets to witness this at the finish line all the time, gets to announce these dreams. And for me, it's beyond a dream. I mean, I've been at Runner's World magazine for 24 plus years and worked my way up to the title of CRO, Chief Running Officer. Most CROs are called Chief Revenue Officers. I am not a Chief Revenue Officer. I am a Chief Running Officer. But, I tell you, in the wildest dreams, I never thought a 1/100th of what happened to me could ever be possible. So I wish that on everyone else, because if it happened to me, it can happen to anyone. I remember going to the Boston Marathon, 30 years ago, and I went to those seminars. I was sitting out there like you, and was, Tony Sandoval and Bill Rogers and Catherine Switzer. I was just like, these people are gods. This is the coolest thing ever. And I ended up on the stage somehow. It's amazing to me. And that's why I say you never know where the sport can take you, but it can do a lot more than you think possible.
Now, in your book, and when you do talk, you also talk about the transition in your life from something else that was occurring in your younger life that has totally changed for you as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me for running, and I mentioned it yesterday, was the word acceptance. When I felt part of a community and was accepted in this community, and it was a great feeling. And at the time of my life that I really needed it, making a switch from getting away from alcohol and drugs, and it was more of to me the acceptance part was never living up to what my father thought I could be. My two older brothers were superior athletes at many sports, and I was not that good. I was a pretty scrawny kid, and I just lived with this. I was never good enough at everything, and maybe that's that middle child syndrome. I was one of 7, and I was that middle child, three younger, 3 older. I don't know, but it was. But when I got into running, I felt accepted, and I realized I did have some talent in it, and it was the acceptance of the running community that really changed my life. And that plaque yesterday, I consider that plaque, and I'm sure Steve feels the same way. It's everyone we encountered in the sport of running is part of that plaque. It has our names on it, but it's not us. It really is this great sport because it is one strong, fantastic community. And I've done a lot of triathlons, done a lot of bike races, wrestled, basketball, baseball, football. The camaraderie in running is beyond any other sport. There's something about runners that really believe in each other, support each other, and realize as a whole the power we have. And we're 11,000 plus whole on Sunday. Whether you're doing the 8K, the marathon, or the half marathon, we're still one big unit out there, going from that start line to the finish line and celebrating what we've accomplished.
And here we are on the 32nd journey of the Royal Victoria, and now Good Life, of course. And to think that there were 700 initially, and now, as you say, over 11,000. And Kathrine, you've seen not only a growth in numbers, but you've seen something very specific happen over those years that you, in fact, last weekend got inducted for. And I think this is very special because when you get such wonderful speakers and such incredible athletes, after a while you tend to think, oh yes, everyone's written a book, everyone's been inducted into a Hall of Fame. Well, that's not the case. It really doesn't happen too often. But not only are these athletes inducted into Halls of Fame, but last weekend Kathrine got inducted into the US Hall of Fame for women for social change.
Yeah.
And that is amazing. And what I'd like you to tell us, if you wouldn't mind, is about your experience here. I believe there were 11 women that got inducted recently, and we're talking about some major names. And if you would give us some of the names that have been there. I know Susan B. Anthony was one of them.
I was actually scared witless. Can you imagine being in such heavy company as these women? And we're talking women like Rosa Parks and Susan B. Anthony and Coretta Scott King and Lilly Ledbetter, who, President Obama just named an Equal Pay Act after. Donna Shalala was there, who's the president of the University of Miami, was on the Clinton administration. She was in cabinet, head of Health and Human Services. And maybe most scary was a 4'11" longest running woman senator in U.S. history, a woman named Barbara Mikulski, who was one of the best speakers I'd ever heard. And we were on this stage, 11 of us, and my name is SW, so I was at the bottom of the alphabet, and I had to speak last. And they each spoke for 10 minutes, so you know that that's going to be like 2.5 hours before they're even going to get to me. And I didn't think I could stay on the stage that long without having to run to the ladies' room. And then I thought about everybody in the audience also having to go to the ladies' room. They weren't really looking forward to hearing me as the last speaker. Nobody wanted to get up and embarrass 1,000 people in the auditorium to get up and go. I thought really there should have been a break. But when it got to me, I realized I also had a message that you guys would understand better than anybody. And the audience really then did understand. I think everybody in the audience, and even maybe the Hall of Fame people first, thought, she broke the gender barrier at the Boston Marathon. And isn't that amazing? Now there are all these women running. But what they needed to understand is, again, what Bart just said and what you all understand, is the sense of what happens to us when we're running is profound. It is a huge sense of self-esteem, of empowerment, of confidence that translates into everything we can do. We all know that running is a part of our lives that makes all of our lives so much better. I often say if you can run a marathon, you can do anything. But actually, if you go out and run a mile a day, you can do anything. And you know that when you run the kilometer a day, then that becomes 5 kilometers, becomes 10 kilometers, becomes a marathon, and then you can achieve anything. And so when I was able to organize the Avon running programs after the Boston incident, I'll tell this story at great length, by the way, at 1:15 this afternoon, but I was compelled by that Boston Marathon incident to create opportunities for other women. I knew that they would feel the same way I did if I could only create the opportunities for them. So I began to organize races. I was fortunate enough to write a good proposal and got a major sponsor. We went global with the concept, eventually had 400 races in 27 countries. And when you think about how running makes you feel, imagine if you're a woman in Brazil and you're so poor you don't have a pair of shoes. Or you're a Kenyan woman who has been carrying water on her head for 3,000 years and treated like dirt and traded for cattle. Or you're a Japanese woman who may be wealthy, but you still have to walk 3 feet behind your husband in an industrialized society because you have no role models or no heroines or no predecessors. And then you began running. And all of these places, they did begin running. And they suddenly got that same sense of empowerment and self-esteem we have. And they're changing the social fabric in those countries because of it. Yeah. And it's very powerful. Very, very powerful. And when I delivered that message, it was like, oh my God, this is so much bigger than we ever imagined. Well, it's not only bigger than we imagined, we also have a lot yet to do. But we also have made a huge, huge impact. I guess one of the things that is so profound about all of this, Steve, is, 61% of the women running on Sunday are 61% of the field are women. Okay, probably when this race began in 32 years ago, there were a handful of women. Vancouver Marathon, the first year there was one woman. Okay, in 72, I believe, right? In 67, an official tried to throw me out of the race because I was a woman. So all of these changes have happened in my lifetime. So you know how fast that is? That's a nanosecond in terms of like our evolution. So the future is really quite exciting. Very, very exciting.
It is, and when people look back and look to 1928 when women were doing 800 meters and they weren't allowed to go any further at that point, and then you were very much a part also of the introduction of marathon for women in 1984, and it must have been a thrill for you to see the race, let alone see an American in the form of Joan Benoit coming through to claim gold.
We all know that there are seminal moments that we can look back on in sports, and in our sport of running, we can name those iconic moments. And in women's running, one of the first one was 1928. And in case the audience doesn't know this story, in the 1928 Olympics, women had fought very, very hard for being able to even compete in the Olympic Games, because in 1896, when the modern Olympics were recreated, women were not allowed to compete. So there was a movement. This is a suffragette movement, and they got some running events in the Olympic Games by 1928. The longest event was the 800 meters. Well, the first 3 women across the line broke the world record, the existing world record, and kind of staggered into the infield and lay down on the grass. Spectators were horrified. Women are exhausted in public. This is defeminizing. Remember Harold Abrahams in the movie Chariots of Fire? Right? He became a redoubtable journalist and covered that Olympics and said that these women were desexing themselves and causing a danger to society. And he wrote these articles, and the event was withdrawn because there was this prevailing attitude that women were too weak and too fragile, and we have to protect them from injuring themselves. So wait for it. That event, the 800 meters for women in the Olympics, mere two laps around the track, was not reinstated until the 1960 Olympics. Okay? So you can imagine when I ran the Boston Marathon in 1967, it was still the lunatic fringe. And the idea of saying, I want to get this event in the Olympic Games was like, you're smoking poppy. You got to be out of your mind. But I just knew. And I also knew because my coach and I had run 31 miles, so 50 Ks about, before the Boston Marathon. And we discovered that the longer I went, the better I could go. So the guys on the cross-country team would never come out and do more than 20 Ks with us. And Arnie himself, my coach, passed out at the end of this particular workout. But we discovered that, in fact, women do have an endurance and stamina, perhaps that excels that of men in really, really long distances. So these are the areas that we're going to be exploring. Yeah. But certainly when the Olympics happened in 1984, it was another seminal moment in women's history. But let's not forget, I was a broadcaster for that event, for ABC. After the first 3 women came in, what happened? Gabrielle Anderson, she's from Switzerland, came in completely dehydrated. Do you remember? And all crippled over like this and staggered around the stadium. Took her 6 minutes to make the loop around the stadium. And of course, ABC sensationalized it and came in close, and there she is going, and I said, oh my God. Are they going to pull the marathon like they did in 1928? And the reaction was fantastic. Instead of making her out to be, a pariah, they made her out to be a heroine, And I said, maybe equality is the right to be exhausted in public. You know? It's the truth.
And what you just reminded me of was, you remember the Olympic Games where there was an Afghani gentleman who was like 4.5 hours limping around, and it was in the dark, and he was bandaged and everything, and he was a hero in the media's eyes immediately, and probably because, as you say, it was a gender thing at that time. Now, talking about women, last week I had the pleasure of being with the Lionsgate Roadrunners, who celebrated their 40th gathering. I see we've got some of them here with us. Yay. And the Vancouver Marathon did likewise, celebrating its 40th this year as well. But I had the pleasure of commentating a couple of years ago. We had a 10K race up in Penticton, and the women were first, second, and third overall in a mixed race. And you and I both know, Bart, that there's a lady called Pam Reed, who on 2 occasions has won outright the 135-mile Badwater Death Valley race. Now, Bart and I have both done that, except Bart also ran climbed to the top of Mount Whitney on top of that, which makes it 146 miles. But the regular race stops
Don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't try this at home.
It's an unbelievable event. The temperatures can go up to like 135 degrees. You've got 3 big passes to climb. The first hill is 18 miles long. The second one's 15 miles long. And the finish is 13 miles straight uphill to the Whitney Portals. Now, after that, Bart actually climbed to the top of Mount Whitney as well to finish it off. So you're looking in the race at 5 marathons plus 10K. So, Bart, I'd like to ask you, what got you on the line for that one?
It's that weed.
Yeah. I did too much of that stuff in my younger days. There was I did Badwater, and I go into great detail in my presentation at 2 o'clock, but I did it as a work assignment, and I was just so stupid because I never ran past 26.2 miles in my life. And when that race director, a gentleman by the name of Dave Pomple back then, when he said 1 minute to go to the start of the Badwater 146, and it was called the Badwater 146 back then. That was the course up to the top of Whitney. He said 1 minute to go to the race, and you're supposed to get all psyched up, and I was like, whoa, this race is 120 miles longer than I've ever run in my life. What the heck am I doing here? Like, wow, that's crazy. And but I just remember thinking, well, you can't do anything about it right now. You can't go out and do a long run. The race now is going to start in like 30 seconds. So I just took that attitude of just making it a journey, not looking at it as a race, and just embracing the sport and what it's all about. And it absolutely, it's hard to imagine running 146 miles in these extreme conditions could be fun, but it actually was fun. It was arduous, don't get me wrong. But it was fun, and my goal was just to get to that finish line, which I did on top of Mount Whitney. And then, it's the weirdest thing. After you finish the race at the top of Mount Whitney, you have to walk 11 miles back to your car at the Whitney Portals, which is now the finish line. So don't park your car 11 miles from the finish line tomorrow. I've done it. It's not fun. But it was one of the, I did it 22 years ago, so the ultra scene was around, but not as big as it is now, and nobody heard of this race. And then we did a big story in Runner's World, and they created Badwater Bart, which was me, and the race then took off, and now is a very popular race, pushes some of the greatest athletes, and now they just do that traditional 135 miles, because the last 11 miles isn't a national park. The race was never smart enough to secure a permit to be on the national park, so now they just avoid that to stay out of trouble, which was a smart move on the race director's part. But it's challenged some of the greatest athletes, Scott Jurek, Pam Reed, Dean Karnassus. They've all gone out there and done it. But I've only done it once. I get that question all the time. I learned it was arduous. And if I did it now, I would be out there so long. I always had that fear that, I get this from my buddy Bob Babbitt, that I'd be coming into the town of Lone Pine, which is at 125 miles, and there'd be some kid delivering a newspaper, and the headlines would be the guy who won the race, and I would still be out there during the race. And that would just freak me out, reading about, those last 13 miles up to the hill. You could read what happened in the race, and you're still out there running.
Isn't that something?
That did happen to me once. I'm not kidding you. At the Boston Marathon in 1967, it took me 4 hours and 20 minutes. In those days, the Boston papers had something like 7 dailies. And the journalists would go along in the bus alongside, and they were with the leaders, and they would file their stories, and they would drop them off like every 3 or 4 miles with like little press boys on bicycles, and they'd run them into the newsroom. And so the papers kept coming out with edition after edition after edition. So I'm coming down out of Heartbreak Hill, down Beacon Street into Boston. And there's this paper boy on the corner shouting, "Read all about it, New Zealander wins Boston Marathon." I turned to my coach, I said, "Geez, give me a break." I said, the guy's not only had a shower, and he's had a press conference. And I said, "Arnie, he's drinking a beer right now."
That's so true.
Drinking a beer, you remember some of the Canadians, early Boston winners, actually used to smoke a cigar after as well, as part of their training and celebration. But talking about serious athletes and serious distance as well, there's a guy called Marshall Ulrich, for instance.
Yeah.
Marshall Ulrich pretty much does that event every year. And he, because of the anguish, for those of you who have ever had blooded toenails and blistered toenails that lift off, he had them surgically removed so he wouldn't have to deal with that ever again. Yeah. So you get some people, you get some people that are really out there. And I see in our audience today, we also have a gentleman who will be doing his 493rd marathon, and that is Mr. Bob Dolphin at the age of 82.
There he is, right there. Hey! That's what our sport's all about, right there.
And the amazing thing is, too, we know he's aiming for number 500, which is an event that he actually is the race director for, along with his wife, Lenore. So good luck, and we look forward to seeing you out there. But could I ask, how many people are doing their very first either half marathon or marathon? Have we got anyone here for the first time?
Wow.
Well, thank you, and appreciate that.
Yes. Go ahead.
Don't be concerned about time.
Yep.
Don't give yourself any expectation. This is like sex. Like the first time, you always remember it. See? So what you want to do, that's it. Well, you always will remember the first time. So you...
No, Bart was smoking
sex was a lot faster than the marathon, let me tell you. It was 2 minutes and 6 seconds, not 2 hours and 6 minutes. I did a 2:08 that first... we're not going to go there.
This is where we learned about the Yasso 100, 800s here, yeah.
You know, so many people say, "Oh, I want to do it in less than run a half marathon in less than 2 hours." Don't have any time expectation for any of this, because both of those events are diabolical. They can throw you a curveball. You can get a blister and you finish, and then you're going to be disappointed. So don't be disappointed. It's a wonderful thing to have the first event. Just enjoy the atmosphere, have fun, and then every race after this you can compare to time.
Yeah, it is really just that. Go out there, enjoy it. People are going to ask you today, the first timers are going to ask you today, what's your goal time and all that stuff. Just tell them you're going to run a personal best. PR and PB, whatever you use, because you will, because it's going to be your PR no matter what. And as Kathrine said, just enjoy it. It's all about, you'll have that finish time that then you can work on and improve. But that first one, you want to finish, that you want to do this stuff forever, for the rest of your life. And if you go out and have that awful experience, you're going to think, whoa, why would I ever do this again? But if you had that great experience, you're going to go back to your room and enter a marathon that afternoon on your computer. Or a half marathon.
So another piece of advice I've been giving people, because they come in by my booth and for the book and all, I say, look, the other thing you need to do today is go to a liquor store and get a bottle of champagne. And go back to your hotel room, dump the trash can out, fill it with ice, put the champagne bottle in there. And you look at that as you go out the door in the morning, and you say, when I come back from my marathon or my half marathon, I'm going to drink that champagne. And actually, it's good advice, meaning you're going to have a celebration whether you didn't run well or you did run well. Because you're not going to be able to do another marathon or half marathon for a while anyway. So you might as well just celebrate and enjoy the experience.
Wow.
Now, a funny sequel to this is that when Rob and I and you were leaving the expo last night, that nice man Gilles, who was minding the door here, stopped us and said, "Hey, listen," he said, "where's the nearest liquor store? Everybody's asking me."
I remember that. I never had that question in all the races I've gone to.
Well, you're quite right. Sometimes it's bliss, sometimes it's blisters. But whatever happens, you will learn something. And hopefully the one thing you'll also learn is your attitude actually represents everything. Your entire experience will depend on your attitude. So I urge you to think about the fact that you can't do much more right now in terms of your training. You can't do much more even about nutrition. And hopefully some of you are here to hear Tara Whitten, but you can take that with you. But you can determine what attitude you want to take out in the course. And that includes the way you speak to yourself inside and the way you speak to the 1,500 volunteers out there. So I tell you something, if you go through the course and you are saying to yourself, way to go, congratulations, well done, and you start saying thank you to yourself and to people around you, you will have a wonderful time because of the attitude, and it will be about the experience more than it will be about the time. The bonus is the time if you achieve your goals. These two people, I can't imagine what your goals could be now after everything that you've achieved. You did go on to win the New York Marathon. You did go on to set a personal best of 2:51. You commentate at Olympic US trials and at the Olympic Games itself. You've commentated at numerous marathons. I've always loved it when you're in a sidecar. I think that's fascinating. Can you tell me about your best moments as a commentator on the sport as well?
First of all, when you're commentating alongside, in a sidecar in particular, a motorcycle, let's say at the lead of the New York City Marathon, I make a joke. I say you got to like spit and sweat and snot a lot because it gets all over you, okay? And the Gatorade, sometimes people puking on you. But I got to tell you, it is amazing being alongside of these athletes. They're like, it's like being alongside the most beautiful racehorses you could ever imagine. And it's a privilege. It's a real gift. I get frustrated with television because it's ephemeral. And because you never can seem to hear right, and you deliver your best lines, and they say, well, we couldn't hear Kathrine because we had some breakup, and then it's gone, that kind of stuff. So TV is a love-hate relationship for me, actually. Yeah, I mean, I've been there for some amazing moments. I was, actually, I got interviewed just a couple days ago here by a journalist who said that he knew I had commentated on the Ben Johnson Carl Lewis race.
Yeah.
And what was that like? And I said, wow, guys, I mean, it was staggering, to be there for that and to then wake up in the night and hear the news, that Ben had tested positive, and how upset I was about that, because I feel he was so taken advantage of by his minders and the system. And we got to work on that. As athletes, we got to work on that together. So, because this, a lot of athletes are being taken advantage of, and we got to do better than that. But anyway, you're probably going to say my best moment was at the Olympic marathon for women in 1984. It was not, because I was so fraught and so tied up. I would say my best moment in broadcasting was when Paula Radcliffe made her comeback in the New York City Marathon after she tanked in the Athens Olympics. And she ran, I get a chill just thinking about it, she ran neck and neck with Susan Chepkamay from Kenya for the last, 20 Ks of the race, the last half. They were shoulder to shoulder, neither one of them giving an inch. And Susan Chepkamay even was like doing, for a while, projectile vomiting because she was hanging on so hard. And I said, how can any human be performing at this level? And because, I mean, I feel pretty bad when I'm sick like that. And they hung together, and it was a race for the ages. And as they came into Central Park, I said, one is racing for redemption, which was Paula, because everybody said, oh, she's finished. The British press loved to trash her. And the other one, Susan, I said, she's running for recognition, because she had always been a great runner, but always second. And this was her moment for claim to fame. As it turns out, but maybe 100 meters from the finish did Paula make that last burst and fell across the finish line and won the race, and they embraced. And then Paula threw up, and as it turns out that she was running that race on food poisoning too. So, you think of these women and these athletes and what they go through, and, they lay it on the line. Their life is out there completely. It's just awesome to be a part of. So I would say that race, definitely. Yeah.
Well, that really is a standout, absolutely, and understandably.
I painted that picture for you, right? Yeah.
And her time, the world record time of 2:15, if you think back for the men's times, that was Jim Peters' best ever time as well, one of the all-time greats out of Britain. Talking about dangerous and putting it on the line, if I may, I mean, you've done things like the Bear Buns Run, you've done Badwater, but you've also been attacked by a pretty big animal in Africa. So can you tell us about the rhino incident?
Yeah, I have some classic pictures I show in my 2 o'clock presentation, but and we were talking about it last night in a restaurant. I did this run.
I've never heard that story.
The run itself, this guy was going to do this run in a place called Chitwan Park in Nepal, which is a reserve for tiger and rhinoceros. Rhinoceros are pretty easy to see. The tigers kind of lay low, and that would not be a good thing to run into in the middle of a race. But he was convinced this would work, and thank God he convinced me into doing a test run with him. So it was actually a practice run, because 3 miles into our run, we came around the corner, and there was a rhino right in the middle of the trail, kind of sideways, and then rhinos they can only see about 30 or 40 yards, but they have a great sense of smell, and smelled 2 runners from about 60, 70 meters, and then turned right at us. And I love animals and study animals and read everything I can about animals, so I knew that the telltale sign was the rhino puts its head down and then it's coming at you. Well, the rhino didn't put his head down, but by the time it turned, I was already running the other direction, and my buddy wasn't, and I'm like, what are you thinking here, dude? Like, this is for real, and I'll never forget that. But we ended up running back to camp and dealing with more rhinos, but that night, we went out for a run at sunset in Chitwan Park around 6:30 at night, and the sun was just setting. It was beautiful. And we're out in this trail, and then all of a sudden you hear a rhino running. And not only that thunderous sound, but you heard the breathing of this animal. And you couldn't see the animal because we were in high, what they call elephant grass, which is grass about 8 feet high. And all we heard was that noise. And there was a Nepalese guide with us, and he said, do 6 o'clock. And we trained this. So 6 o'clock is this. Go like 6 o'clock. So he said, run into the grass and do 6 o'clock. And he said, good chance the rhino will just run past you. I was like, good chance? Like, what are the odds, dude? Like, so we did that 6 o'clock routine twice as we heard this rhino. And I have no idea if it was 10 yards away or 50 yards away. I mean, when you can hear it breathing, it had to be close. But, thank God we didn't get hit, he didn't find us. But I remember the guy saying, he said, if you do this 6 o'clock, the rhino has to be really good because you're only going to be about this wide. And it's going to have its head down, plowing through this high grass. And if he can find you, he's a really good rhino. And I'm like, do they wear signs that say I'm not a good rhino or bad, It's crazy. And it's the same guy the next day when we left Chitwan Park. That day we crossed the Nari River and we were in a boat, and then we went back over on elephant back. And each time we crossed the Nari River, we always saw these crocodiles, and he would point them out. And the next day we were leaving back to Kathmandu to go home, and the elephants were gone, and the boat was gone. And he said, we got to walk across the river. I'm like, walk across the river where we saw the crocodiles this afternoon? He goes, yeah. He goes, but we're going to wait till dark. They'll be asleep. This guy's amazing. Trust this guy. And it was the longest walk of my life. We walked across that river, 3 of us, the Nepalese guy, Jim Crosswhite, myself, and we just quietly stepped, because he said, if you move the rocks, it'll wake them up. They'll hear the vibrations. He said, trust me, they're asleep, just, walk quietly.
So this begs the question, does this mean you've ever been to the running of the bulls in Pamplona?
Yeah, no, I've never done that. That's one I get asked about all the time. But I would, when we were on the ultra scene, I would like to say in one race, I did Comrades last year, which is a race of social change, as Catherine and Steve would know. A race that the oldest ultramarathon in the world and the largest ultramarathon in the world in South Africa. And between the years of 1921 and 1975, they did not, well, of course, they didn't allow women in the old days too, but they did not allow any other black citizens to run the race. The country, in those years, 70% black citizens. How can you suppress 70% of the population from running in a running race, which was the biggest in-country celebration? And only the whites were allowed to run it from 1921 to 1975. And then after 1975, they allowed the first black citizens to run. Between 75 and 1994, till apartheid was banned in 1994, it was the only time in public in South Africa where a white citizen would help a black citizen in a public scene. I'm sure it happened behind closed doors and on farms, and people would, help a white person would help a black citizen, but it never happened in public. It was something that just didn't go on. But during Comrades, the rules were lifted. And if a black runner was coming along and was struggling, white people would get off the sidewalk and hand them water and baked potatoes and things like that, literally lift the person up and encourage them to keep going. And incredible. And then, of course, apartheid's banned in 1994. Nelson Mandela when he became president, would be at the finish line putting finisher medals around finishers at the finish line of Comrades. That is an incredible, powerful message. And so now the race, 24,000 people start a 56-mile race. 24,000. The largest ultramarathon in North America is the JFK 50-miler, which gets about 950 finishers. Comrades, it's 24,000. And it's right now about 60% black South Africans that do the race. So once they were accepted, they flourished. And when I did it last year, they did a TV interview with me right before the start of the race. So I got off this tower, and the race was going to start in 2 minutes, and they threw me in the first corral right in the front with these black Zulu warriors who were going to run 5:30 pace for 56 miles, and I was going to start out about 11-minute pace. So I was like, I can't be here. Like, I am going to get killed in this first part of this race. But as that happened, they played this freedom song called Shoshalosa. And all these black South Africans were crying. And I was like, oh my God, they got to start this race now. Or I was hyperventilating. I thought, if they don't shoot this gun off, I'm never even going to run one step in this race. There was so much emotion. And when I talked to those athletes, it was the honor, the privilege to run. That's all they asked for. Social change. Gives me goosebumps.
That's great. It's hard to effect.
You try to put yourself in their shoes and think how long they were suppressed and how did they do it. And the message that Mandela put out in 1994 was, don't harbor on the past because it'll be claustrophobic and you'll never break away. Just think of what we have now, culturally, physically, how lucky we are, and go out and perform.
Absolutely,
Powerful.
because you know as well as I do, some of the early winners like Hardy Billington and then later winners like Bruce Fordyce, this was not about them not wanting a race against their fellow countrymen, and now they're able to do so. And as you know, apart from some Russian women who come along and a Canadian last year who did so very well there, it usually is black South Africans that do so very well there. And if you ever have an opportunity, let's say you're planning one big sort of bucket list event and you like the idea of doing 90K, it truly is. I've done it myself. It truly is a remarkable experience. The aid stations are unlike anything I've ever seen. There's 1 million people line the roads all the way. They have an up year and a down year. They have 11 hours of non-stop TV coverage.
Yes.
It's absolutely amazing. The winner and the last person, it was under 11 hours when I did it, the last person getting under 11 hours is treated with the same level of respect and publicity as the overall winner. Is stunning to see. And they have these rugby players who grab arms together at the finish line. You can't even dive through them. If you're 11 hours and 1 second, you're not going to make it. Shut down, bam. But it's just phenomenal. So, talking about social change, the personal change, this sport has affected both of you in so many wonderful ways. You've written about it. I wonder if you could tell us about your books. You've got 3 different books that I'm aware of, and one, because you mentioned New Zealand, I think it's very important people realize, because I also mentioned the Vancouver Marathon earlier as well. Her husband is a great Roger Robinson, probably the #1 person in terms of literature and running. If you want to read any spectacular books by a great literary giant, he's a man to read, I can assure you of that. Also, he is still the record holder for the Vancouver Marathon Masters, 2 hours 18 minutes. At 40 years of age.
Yeah.
That last year would have beaten everyone, including the Kenyans this year. And he was there to commentate with me. So we're thrilled. We understand the Vancouver Marathon may, in fact, bring him back next year, hopefully, along with Bart as well. So that would be wonderful.
Yeah, they're right there.
No pressure.
No pressure.
But read Roger's stuff. Get copies of the books. This is where, for some of you who are just beginning, you're hearing about the change that has occurred for these 2 human beings. You've heard about social change. And I tell you, I grabbed this the other day because I was looking through some of my magazines, recent magazines, and look at the picture that came up there that was put in a Canadian magazine. 1975 New York City Marathon. You're at the start line there. Mickey Gorman is alongside you. Now, is that easy for you to return to that in your mind?
Sorry, when I see this picture, it's easy. Oh, yeah, you instantly remember the moment, but it's interesting. I've never seen this particular picture before. So that's always fascinating when you see it from a different angle. And you look at them and immediately you say, where are these people now? What has happened in their lives? And you talk about Mickey Gorman. She lives in Vancouver. Okay? And actually, she's not well right now. So, embrace her and bring her into the fold. She's quite shy. But this is a woman, I think the only woman who 3 times won the New York City Marathon and the Boston Marathon. Wow. And was a world record holder. Began running so that she would beef herself up and gain weight, and she never did beef herself up and gain weight. She always remained 4'11" and about 89 pounds. But boy, could she run. It's just amazing. Wonderful, fun woman. And then there in the middle of that picture, that's Joan Oliet, who wrote one of the first ever books on women's running. So, yeah, this was actually the national championships for women in 1975, Marathon National Championships. So.
Please feel free to keep it, seeing as you don't have the photograph.
Great. I'd love to have that.
Appreciate that.
I don't know what the question was, though.
About your book.
Yeah, about my book. About my book. But I do want to say one thing about the comrades. That was a very emotional and touching story. I've never heard you say that that much, Bart, and that's really amazing. So I read about Bart doing this, comrades, in the Runner's World magazine, of which I was reading on the plane home from running the Athens Marathon last November. And this was my first road marathon in 34 years, last November. That's another story which I can tell, which is both hilarious and very enlightening, but at any rate, mostly hilarious. So I could barely get on the plane, and I'm reading, but I'm still flushed with endorphins, and I'm reading Runner's World, and I open it, and I'm reading about Bart running comrades. And Roger, my husband, leans over, and he goes, "Don't even think about it." Needless to say, Roger met me on the course in Athens at about 33K. And for all of us in this room who've run a marathon, you know at 33K, if somebody cheers for you, it's all their fault. Right? By that time, I gave Roger a terrible time. Anyway, about my books. My first book was Running and Walking for Women Over 40. And it's a kind of beginning book, but it really hit a nerve. It came out in the late 90s, and it turned out to be a bestseller because that was just sort of the emergence of a lot of women who said, it's not too late for me to become an athlete. And I'm going to revise that book for women who are over 60 and maybe even over 70, because I'm meeting women who are 65, 70, 75 who are only beginning to run. And they're running marathons, they're running up and down Pikes Peak, they're running comrades, they leave me for dead, and they are getting all of that enthusiasm that we all felt when we first started running on new legs. They may be 75 years old, but they're new for running. So it's astonishing, again, physiologically, to think of that kind of future.
Can I just say a word, because that's wonderful. A lot of people here would probably know that B.J. McHugh, I don't know if she's with us this weekend, but B.J. McHugh, now 82 years of age, a Canadian out of North Vancouver, is the world record holder at the half marathon and the marathon. She, just 2 weeks ago, released her own book, My Road to Rome, and people thought, My Road to Rome, what would that be about? Well, at 80 years of age, they asked her, invited her as an athlete to go and be an elite runner at the Rome Marathon. So can you imagine that? She was given an elite number, and there she is on the starting line with the top Kenyans. So amazing stuff.
Yeah, amazing. And actually, you talk about my book, Marathon Woman, which, in fact, just last week we launched at the Berlin Marathon in a German edition. And the same story happened. Mark Milder, the race director, emailed me and he said, am I going to start with the masses? Because I decided to run the Berlin Marathon in celebration of this, in yet another moment of lunacy. But anyway, he said, do you want to start with the masses? Or would you like an elite bib? And I got, I start with the masses, of course. I'm a 4:30 runner. And I said, wait a minute. Paula Radcliffe is going to be here. Haile Gabriel Selassie is going to be here. Patrick McCow maybe will set a world record, which he did. I want that elite bib, you know. Kathrine, I got my big bib, Kathrine, and it was right there in the starting line. It was a thrill. My biggest fear was that I would trip them. So I mean, I got out of the way so quickly, but it was a great photo op. But yeah, so Marathon Woman is my autobiography. I say it's like beer, sex, and rock and roll. And gosh, I'm going to laugh about that. But of course, Bart's is a lot more racy than mine. So, but it's about the evolution of what I talked about at the beginning of the session, 1967. You know, Jock Semple throwing me out of the race to getting the women's marathon in the Olympic Games. That whole social transformation. But it parallels my own life, and people are really amazed that how frank it is, and. It's interesting. Bart and I had never discussed this till last night. I decided at 60 That was really time to tell the truth about how tough it is sometimes. You know, that sometimes marriage isn't easy, or it's not at all successful, or how hard your job is, and how hard it is sometimes to train twice a day and you don't have any money, and you're putting a husband through grad school and you got to pay the car payments and the rent, and you know, you think, is it ever going to end? Are we ever going to get even recognized as women, and all that kind of stuff. So that's what the book is about. And in the end, it's not even about running, it's about overcoming the impossible, which is what our running is all about. And the third book, which is actually the second book I wrote, is, and we're signing and selling our books out there, by the way, if you're interested, is called 26.2 Marathon Stories. Actually was done by a Canadian packager who I couldn't convince would not, Canadians and everybody else in the world except Brits would not understand that 26.2 is actually the distance of a marathon, that it's 42.2, but they wanted 26.2 Marathon Stories. But it's a wonderful book. And Roger and I wrote it together. It's beautiful. Like, some of the most luscious pictures in running. Runner's World said it was one of the best 5 running books ever. But it's also, the substance in it is very good, because Roger and I decided to go back to original sources and find out some of those historical stories we've heard all along that have often been really a myth that's been perpetuated. Let's get the story told correctly, and we have, and I think you guys would really enjoy that.
But when you get some of the world's leading runners, like a Boston winner, looking at not only your philosophy, but looking at the way you train and listening and saying, what are these Yasso 800s that people are talking about out here, and how can they work? For those of you who haven't checked it out, for those of you who are looking to have a bit of a training program, to integrate something new into your training program, Amby Barefoot validated this in his own regime and did that in training, and it works. Now, we called them the Wazoos. Whenever we did them at track, we called them the Wazoos, and people dreaded them because they're 800-meter runs. But I tell you, it works. So check that out. Check Bart's book out. Check out the Yasso 800s. They're well worth putting in, because if you can run, say, a 2:55 800, and you do a number of them, he goes into how to do that, you can then work towards a 2:55 marathon. If you do 2:30, it's a 2:30. A 4-minute equals a 4-hour, and so on. Well worth checking out, because you can integrate that into your ongoing training program. I know we're short on time right now. Don't forget to check out Bart's books. I just want to read some of the quotes, because there's so much that can be said, and I hope you'll come back for their individual sessions later on today. But here's some of the things that I was really impressed with that Bart has quoted before. When I started running, I started dreaming. It couldn't be helped. The mind works as hard as the body does during exercise. It knows its role during those lonely interludes, to inspire, to analyze, and fantasize. They say our role is to aspire to inspire before we expire. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand to Bart Yasso and Kathrine Switzer. We really appreciate them being here today.
Thank you. That was great. And now what y'all came for, spot prizes or door prizes. I know that's why they're here.
Good ones, too.